A cordial greeting. Today is Sunday, June 23, 2024. This is meteorologist Ruben Garcia. In this video, we are going to briefly talk about Invest 93, which is already over sectors of Tamaulipas. But in this video, I would like to talk about which areas might have cyclonic development during the end of June and the beginning of July. Specifically, we will be discussing the western region of the Caribbean Sea, the southern Gulf of Mexico, and also the region to the east of the Lesser Antilles because the areas are of interest for the possibility of some low-pressure systems developing that could find marginally favorable conditions for cyclonic organization by the end of June and the beginning of July. Largely, this will be associated with several strong tropical waves moving across the tropical Atlantic and continuing to emerge from Africa over the coming days. In this infrared satellite image, we can identify some of them that have good convective activity, which is definitely not typical for this time of year. However, it seems that the warm temperatures in the tropical Atlantic Ocean are helping them remain quite strong. It is important that if you live in the Eastern Caribbean, the Central American region, and Mexico during this week, you stay alert to several tropical waves moving westward and crossing the Caribbean in case any of them have development potential. In this video, I will be discussing how likely it is that we will see the development of any tropical cyclones over the next 2 weeks. We will talk about both the factors that are favorable for cyclonic formation and those that are not favorable. Let's zoom in a bit on the region of Tamaulipas and Mexico. Here you can see the rotation associated with Invest 93, which a few hours ago entered sectors of central and northern Tamaulipas and is currently causing significant precipitation for the central western region of Tamaulipas and the south of Nuevo León. A Hurricane Hunter aircraft was investigating this area this morning and found that the circulation was well defined, but lacked consistent thunderstorm areas over the center of circulation. This is why the National Hurricane Center did not classify the disturbance as a tropical depression. However, the reality is that this low pressure was very close to being a tropical depression. Something very similar happened with what was Invest 92, which, if it had remained over water for one more day, would probably have achieved the classification of tropical depressions. This means that officially, so far, only one tropical depression and tropical storm Alberto have formed. Now we are analyzing where tropical storm Beryl could form. What I can tell you is that no cyclonic development is anticipated in any area of the Atlantic over the next 7 days, despite having a very strong tropical wave moving over sectors of the southern Lesser Antilles. One of the reasons why we'll not have cyclonic development is that we have a cloud of Saharan dust moving westward across the tropical Atlantic. It will continue its westward trajectory over the coming days. This is definitely a limiting factor for cyclonic activity, although it is normal for the months of June and July. Now, as you should know, the development of Tropical Storm Alberto and Invest 93 is associated with a pulse of energy from the Madden-Julian Oscillation that moved through the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic, but has now reached the region of Africa and the Indian Ocean. As you can see, by the end of June, the phase of the Madden-Julian Oscillation will remain over the African continent and the Indian Ocean. This is what we call Phase 2 and Phase 3 of the Madden-Julian Oscillation. As we can see, it will remain stationary over the next 10 days in Phase 2 and Phase 3 of the Madden-Julian Oscillation. This is very important because when the Madden-Julian Oscillation is in Phase 2 or Phase 3, that is, over the African continent and the Indian Ocean, historically, we have seen that this favors cyclonic activity in the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. In this graph, shown in red, we see above normal cyclonic activity where, for Phase 3 of the Madden-Julian Oscillation, we have historically seen a higher concentration of cyclones in this area. One of the factors we are closely monitoring is that Phase 2 or Phase 3 of the Madden-Julian Oscillation can generate more favorable conditions for cyclone formation, especially across the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. This happens because when the Madden-Julian Oscillation is in Phase 2 or Phase 3, the wind shear decreases across the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean Sea. This is why I am showing you these images. In red, wind shear is represented above normal, while in blue, wind shear is represented below normal. Currently, you can see that the conditions are not favorable for cyclonic development because a lot of wind shear remains over the Caribbean and regions of the western Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico, mostly associated with a trough located in this area. But see the changes expected over the next few days, particularly for the end of June and the beginning of July, especially towards the east of the Lesser Antilles and in the Caribbean Sea. Wind shear below normal, represented by the blue in this image, is expected. This coincides very well with what we have seen historically. The Madden-Julian Oscillation in Phase 3 reduces wind shear in the Atlantic and thus promotes cyclonic activity. However, remember that we are in the month of June, when typically, tropical cyclones do not form in the tropical Atlantic. In fact, June is usually the least active month of the hurricane season. But remember that ocean surface temperatures continue to be very high for this time of year, particularly in the main cyclonic development region, which includes the area east of the Lesser Antilles and the Caribbean Sea. This is a very important factor that definitely increases the chances of seeing early development of some cyclones in the tropical Atlantic. But let's talk about the factors that do not favor cyclonic formation. First, over the next few days, we will have a cloud of Saharan dust moving across the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean. As you should know, Saharan dust is a significant impediment to the formation of cyclones from the tropical waves that come out of Africa. This will definitely be one of the main impediments that the tropical waves moving through the region will face over the next 2 weeks. Remember that Saharan dust is also associated with dry air, and as shown by the GFS model projection, by the end of June, we will have quite a bit of dry air in the tropical Atlantic region, which can also interfere with the tropical waves emerging from Africa. Dry air will also be another significant impediment to reducing the chances of cyclonic development. However, note that the GFS model has several fairly strong tropical waves. Later, I will show you the projections of the best models, but it is always important to analyze the climatology. If we look at the last 10 days of June, it is very rare to see the development of tropical cyclones east of the Lesser Antilles. They are mostly concentrated in the Gulf of Mexico and the Western Caribbean Sea, as was the case with Tropical Storm Alberto, which formed during the past week. However, as July begins, we see that the probability of development east of the Lesser Antilles starts to increase. It is worth mentioning that last year in June, 2 tropical storms formed east of the Lesser Antilles. I mention this because 2023 also had extremely warm ocean surface temperatures in this region, and last year we saw the early formation of cyclones in this area. Therefore, we cannot really rule out the possibility of one forming over the next 2 weeks. It is important to let you know that the National Hurricane Center has not yet marked this area as an area of interest for cyclonic development. However, note that the Climate Prediction Center has marked this area with above normal precipitation anomalies associated with several strong tropical waves moving through the region. Now let's look at the global model projections. But before that, I wanted to invite you to subscribe to my channel to stay informed during this hurricane season. Go to the bottom of the video to the red button that says subscribe, click it, and then click the bell to get notifications when I record new videos. Let's start by looking at the GFS model projection. First, look at this strong tropical wave approaching the southern Lesser Antilles during Monday and Tuesday of this week. Eventually, this tropical wave will be traveling westward, and when it reaches the Western Caribbean region, the GFS model suggests that a low-pressure system could form east of the Yucatán Peninsula with some possibility of cyclonic development. In fact, in the latest run, it shows potentially a tropical depression forming in this region during the next weekend, eventually reaching the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. This is something we will be monitoring, and I suspect that the National Hurricane Center will mark this area as an area of interest for cyclonic development by midweek, as long as the model projections remain consistent. Also, note that at the beginning of July, specifically July 2nd, it shows a strong tropical wave moving through the southern Lesser Antilles. In the latest runs, it even shows what could be a tropical depression moving through this region. However, once it reaches the Caribbean Sea, the GFS model significantly weakens it in the region south of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, in the area we know as the Cyclone Cemetery. On the other hand, we also have the projection from the European model, which also shows a strong tropical wave moving through the Lesser Antilles during the morning hours of Tuesday. Eventually, it moves towards the Western Caribbean region. In this case, the European model has the tropical wave interacting with parts of Honduras and Belize, which hinders its cyclonic formation. However, it does show a low-pressure system east of Belize by the next weekend. Looking further ahead, the European model also shows a strong tropical wave that could arrive from the east and enter the Caribbean around mid-next week. This is precisely the same tropical wave that the GFS model marks. We also have the projection from the UK model, which shows a low-pressure system developing east of Nicaragua by midweek, associated with the first tropical wave moving through the Caribbean Sea. Why am I paying a lot of attention to this matter? It's because many members of the GFS model ensemble develop a strong low-pressure system east of the Yucatán Peninsula or over the Bay of Campeche. This would be for the end of this week. Surprisingly, there is quite a bit of support among the GFS model members for the second tropical wave that could move through the Caribbean Sea at the beginning of July. So, even though this is a long-term projection, we will be watching closely to see how this forecast evolves. Moreover, many members of the European model ensemble also develop a tropical depression east of the Lesser Antilles, associated with that upcoming tropical wave. In terms of cyclonic development probability, the members of the European model have a 30 to 35% chance of developing a tropical depression either in the waters of the Western Caribbean or in the Bay of Campeche, specifically by the end of this week. By the beginning of next week, they show up to a 25% chance of developing a tropical depression east and southeast of the Lesser Antilles. This is a significant signal, and although the climatology is against seeing development in this area, we do have some factors that could allow at least a strong tropical wave to be monitored in this region. If it does not organize in this area, we will need to monitor it closely because historically, we have seen that when they reach the Western Caribbean region, conditions can improve dramatically. That's why I suspect that at least by mid to late this week, the National Hurricane Center will be marking this area with possibilities for cyclonic development. Depending on how the projections evolve, the region east of the Lesser Antilles will likely be marked next week. However, this is preliminary. We can remain calm because there is no imminent threat. We have many days to observe this calmly. Stay tuned to Hurricane Info. Before I go, I want to invite you to become a member of my YouTube channel, where, with a small monthly contribution, you can support my project and receive some additional benefits. If you're interested, go to the blue button that says Join, click it, and see the different levels of sponsorship. Now I say goodbye. See you in the next videos where I will continue updating the projections of possible developments in late June and early July. See you later.